Today's episode of John's Brief is not talking about a particular video, but just something that I experienced that, Mark, I want to get some feedback from you on. We haven't talked this through. In fact, I just started talking about it, and Mark said, stop that. Let's just talk about it on camera. So you're getting what I'm getting here, okay? So let's talk about the difference between the police use of force, and particularly them being able to draw a firearm to force compliance versus me as a private citizen. Today's video is brought to us by the generosity of Firearms Legal Protection. Firearms Legal Protection is a legal defense program for lawful gun owners. You win the fight, and they will help you win the fight after the fight for the rest of your life. There's a link in the description for a coupon code for a discount for all active self-protection watchers. So, Mark, thanks for coming and doing this. I think these kind of things are really valuable for me and hopefully for our audience.
And it's a lot of fun to talk about, too.
So I'll give you why this came up to me, okay? So a couple weeks ago, I went down to Tucson and I taught a bunch of officers from Tucson PD off-duty carry, concealed carry. Afterwards, we were using their Virtra trainer, that is really cool, 300-degree trainer, where they put their guys in scenarios and, they have reciprocating guns. It's really cool. I mean, it's super cool trainer. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And a couple of times, my friend who had set this up and is a SWAT cop and a K9 cop, great guy, he was like, man, you should have had your gun in your hand a lot faster. And I was like, but I couldn't articulate an immediate deadly threat. And he was like, yeah, but you got to be able to force compliance from there. And I'm like, well, you can do that as a cop, man. But if I do that, I'm going to get a battery charge. I'm going to get an ag assault charge out of that. So why the difference in standard here?
It's an excellent question, and I'm glad it got you thinking, right? Because they're thinking about the issue completely differently than you're thinking about the issue. Mm-hmm. You're thinking about the issue as someone who's not a police officer, and the time you get to draw a gun is when someone is presenting an imminent risk of death or serious physical injury, and everything that you talk about really revolves around that. And certainly police officers get to defend themselves and get to defend others, and so those rules also apply. However, there's an added reason that an officer may get to use a gun, which is to perform a legal duty. That's different. Think about it as sort of making an arrest, right? Say they got an arrest warrant, and they're coming out to arrest you. You're getting arrested. They're going to use whatever force is reasonably necessary to effect that arrest. It's not a self-defense analysis at all. In fact, you see some of these, this comes up a lot in the traffic stop area. In fact, we had a video that was sort of viral. I don't know if you had it on your channel or not. This woman who got pulled over and she was smoking a cigarette and kind of being a pain in the neck to the officer, was being pretty kind to her. And eventually he said, get out of the car. And she says, why do I have to get out of the car? He says, get out of the car. Just for context here, the rule is that if a police officer makes a traffic stop, they have a legal right to get the driver and all of the passengers out of the car. And so he's saying, get out of the car. And she's saying no. And he's saying yes. And this isn't a self-defense situation, but he's going to enforce compliance here.
Yes.
And so this particular officer pulled out a stun gun. I don't know if you remember the issue. Pulled out a stun gun and started opening the door, and now she's resisting. And so this has nothing to do with self-defense, what we talk about. But what it does have to do with is gaining compliance to perform a legal duty. He gave her, she has a legal duty to get out of the car, and he has a right to use as much force as is reasonably necessary to effect that legal duty. So they have a little bit added reason why they get to use force, right? Because in theory, the government gets to use force to enforce the rules.
Yes.
It's a little bit different for us. It's not accurate to say they get a monopoly on force, because we still get to use force in self-defense, but they get to use force to really enforce the rules that we have all agreed upon, which in theory, the problem with our world is the rules that we have to enforce aren't the proper rules.
Right? Yeah, sometimes we need to change the rules.
We've got some screwed up rules, but imagining all the rules are consistent, that's exactly what we want. We want sworn officers using force to get people to comply with the law.
So that allows them, it doesn't even allow them, they use force in order to fulfill a legal duty. I don't have that legal duty, the same duty imposed on me. A police officer has a legal duty to enforce the law.
Yeah, you can walk away, right? I mean, if you're walking down the street and there's somebody getting raped, you and I both would be over there in a hurry, right? Because that's what we do, but we don't have a legal duty to do that. we might say we have a moral duty to
Yes.
do that, but moral duties aren't enforceable in the law.
Well, and in many
Legal
times the
duties are.
statutory law says you know, as a private citizen, it's presumed, okay, if you're going to stop a rape or a kidnapping, then that's an acceptable time for you to use that. So it's allowed, but you don't have a duty to stop those.
Right, yes, there's this whole citizen's arrest thing, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
really a squishy area, and it's not used very often, and it's replete with problems for liability, and then what do you do with the person? You're responsible when you make this sort of citizen's arrest, and it's the kind of thing that probably all lawyers discourage people from doing. Just call the cops and let them do it. But short of that, if we take that area out of it, you don't have a legal duty really to act, with the exception of very, very few circumstances.
Yeah.
So for the most part, you have no legal duty to act, and the police, that's what their job is. They have a legal duty to act and do certain things, and so that's why they get to use force in some circumstances that we just don't. It's a different analysis.
Yeah, and that's why you see cops draw guns in circumstances that me as a private citizen or you as a private citizen would not be okay to draw a firearm. They are enforcing a legal duty.
Yeah, whether they need to draw a gun or not is a different matter.
Still have to be reasonable.
They have to be reasonable. So generally, we like to see sort of a reasonable escalation of force, which is usually, the voice, right? Get out of the car, the command to get out of the car. Then, maybe you'll get the stick, or you'll get a threat for pepper spray or a stun
Taser,
gun or something.
yeah.
If we saw a gun right away, that'd probably be an excessive use of force.
Yeah. And I think we've seen that somewhat sometimes in the news.
We see
You see guys and you go, hey, that's an excessive use right there. And I think that most police officers, they're not looking to use force because they know that that's causing problems left and right, and they just want to go home at the end of the day too. So I just wanted everybody to have this discussion with us because I think that I do have folks that sometimes say, well, it's wrong that they can do something that I can't do. Well, it's not a can issue here. It's a must issue because of a duty. They have a duty that I don't have. I don't have to enforce the law. Somebody could be breaking an egregious law, walking down the street, smoking a big fat doobie or something like that. I'm not enforcing that law. You go off and do your thing, man. Whereas a cop can't do that. He has to enforce the law at that point. So, hey, they have a duty that I don't have, and so they're going to do things that I don't do because they have to fulfill the duty.
Yeah, I think the way of saying it is we don't get to use force unless it's self-defense,
Mm-hmm.
most of the time. Police officers can use it for self-defense or defense of others, which we can as well, but they also get to use force to gain compliance with the law, which is something that we don't do as non-police officers.
Interesting stuff. I wonder if that intersects a little bit with Arizona's current brandishing statute or defensive display of a firearm. So it is an interesting thing that statutorily here in Arizona, now this just changed a couple of years ago, that it says now that you are allowed the defensive display of a firearm against the imminent threat of deadly physical force or ordinary physical force
Yeah, I wish
to
they
display.
I wish they hadn't mucked up the statute by putting deadly physical force, because we already have that.
That's done.
That just is sort of duplication of existing law. So what's really novel about this, and I think it was needed, right? Because here's the situation. This used to come up all the time before this statute was passed, where you have somebody maybe who's carrying concealed
Mm-hmm.
and not looking for any trouble, not causing any trouble. Now here comes a troublemaker, maybe some drunk guy, and he's starting a fight, and he's pushing, and he's slapping, and he's doing these kinds of things, and you would be justified in pushing him back.
Right.
But you don't want to do that. What you really want to do is say, hey man,
Get off me.
leave me alone, I got a gun. What you want to say is, I got a gun, leave me alone.
Mm.
That's what you want to do. But people who were doing that were getting charged, as we know, because now what they're doing is they're sort of brandishing a firearm or threatening deadly physical force by discussing the gun in response to ordinary physical force. So this is sort of an attempt to maybe get a middle ground, to say, okay, there are some things you can do with the gun in response to ordinary physical force, right? You can say, hey man, leave me alone, I got a gun.
Right.
You can say, hey man, look at this.
Right.
You could even brandish it out and hold it in a protective manner, whatever that means.
Whatever a protective manner is, that hasn't been adjudicated yet through. There's no case law there yet.
I don't know what that means, but whatever a protective manner is, you can do that too. You can't discharge the firearm,
Right.
and you can't do anything more than use it in a protective manner, whatever that means. And look, I don't want to be the first guy testing out that statute, but I'd certainly be happy to defend the first guy, do it, but not a wise position to be in.
Not a wise position to be in. So there's a difference there. Arizona has this kind of middle ground statute that allows it in some limited instances.
I always tell people, do not rely on that statute, because what's going to happen is you're going to pull out the firearm in a protective manner, whatever that is, and then the bad guy on the other side and his buddies are going to say you stuck it in his face and said, I'm going to blow your head off. And now we got a factual dispute.
Right.
And your life is going to change depending on which set of facts is believed. Much better to exit stage left if you can safely.
Good stuff here. Mark, thanks for the discussion.
Thanks for having me.